So a very warm welcome to everyone here today to this special part of ATLAS.ti and the International Qualitative Research Network series. And so ATLAS.ti has been partnered with the International Qualitative Research Network at the University of British Columbia, Okanagan, for several years now. And we're really happy to have this partnership where we're bringing two different webinar series, one that we call Explorations in ATLAS.ti, and another one, Insights and Qualitative Research Methods. And so through these two series, we highlight innovative approaches and practices in qualitative data analysis. And we take a look at ATLAS.ti on the one hand and qualitative methods more generally on the other hand. And so we're really happy to be able to bring this knowledge with everyone and to connect like-minded researchers from all around the world. And today in particular, we have the great pleasure of having Dr. Elizabeth Pope with us here. And Dr. Pope is an associate professor at the University of West Georgia. And she's a IRB faculty fellow and as well as certified professional senior trainer of ATLAS.ti. And so today she'll share her insights in this Explorations in ATLAS.ti series. And Dr. Pope will introduce some good practices for completing a literature review using ATLAS.ti. And so we'll get to learn from her. But also, if you have any questions or comments during the presentation, please do write them in the chat here. And then we'd be happy to answer any questions. We can make it interactive as well. I'd be happy to interject, or we can save it at the end. But certainly whatever will make everyone's experience most enjoyable here to get the most out of our hour here together today. And so I thank you everyone for your time. And well, I don't know if Dr. Olson is, we also have Dr. Olson here from the University of British Columbia, Okanagan. Did you have any opening words as well, or?
Yes.
Yes.
Hello. I'd like to welcome you to this session as well. My name is Karen Olson, and I am based at the International Qualitative Research Network at the University of British Columbia at the Okanagan campus. I respectfully acknowledge the Syilx Okanagan Nation and their people on whose traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory UBCO is situated. I would also like to acknowledge that you are joining us today from many places near and far, and to acknowledge the traditional owners and caretakers of your lands. In just a few minutes, I am going to put the link to our website into the chat so that you can have a look at it and see some of the activities that we're planning. And if you'd like to join us, we'd love to have you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And well, without any further ado, Dr. Pope, the floor is yours. So feel free to share your screen and.
Great. Thank you so much for having me, Karen and Ivana. Thank you everyone for coming. I'm Liz Pope. You can call me Liz. I have a little PowerPoint that I'll share, and then my plan was to really just jump into Atlas. So let me share my screen. Can everyone see that?
Yes, yes, we can see.
Great.
Just not in full screen yet, in case you, okay.
Is that okay to do it like that? Because I have a double screen. So when I put it in present mode, I'm like never sure exactly where it's going to go. So can everybody see that fine? Does that work? Yes. Okay, good.
Yes.
So welcome. Thank you for joining me. The terribly long title that I came up for this presentation, I apologize, but basically the point is to just kind of talk about how ATLAS.ti can help with the literature review, and the beginning of the title was meant to capture the idea that a literature review is really the beginning of all research, and it is research itself. So the literature review is really an important place to start with all research, but then in my opinion, it's also an important place to start with Atlas. So just a little bit about me. My name is Liz Pope. I'm an associate professor in the educational research program here at the University of West Georgia. I'm a qualitative methodologist. My degrees are all from the University of Georgia, and I have a PhD in adult education, but I earned my interdisciplinary qualitative studies certificate from the University of Georgia while I was there. I'm a certified senior trainer of ATLAS.ti. I started using it as a graduate student, and I started using it with when I started my literature review. So literature review is actually the best place to start, in my opinion, if you're interested in learning a QDOS. Literature review is kind of a low stakes analysis process. And I really do think it's the best way to start if you're interested in learning a QDOS. My research focuses, I look at adult learning specifically through interfaith encounters. So how do adults learn when they engage with members of other religions, and is it a transformative learning process or not? I also do some research in qualitative research and technology use, specifically in how researchers write about their reflexive processes in using and choosing technology in qualitative research. And then also I do research in teaching reflexivity and subjectivity for students. So as a methodologist, those are my primary research areas. Here's a fun little picture of me and my dog that I put up, who turns 14 today. So she's a birthday girl, but it's just a little picture of me. So what will we do today? The first thing I'm going to do is just kind of talk about the various types of literature reviews. I'm not going to spend very long on it, but just recognize that there are lots of different literature reviews. So when somebody says I'm doing a literature review, there's actually a lot of different kinds that they can do. And I am going to be very general about this process, keeping in mind that the purpose of a literature review is going to be different depending on the type of literature review you are doing. I'll talk a little bit about the pros and cons of using a QDOS like ATLAS.ti for literature reviews. And then I will open Atlas and talk about my process for completing a literature review with ATLAS.ti, keeping in mind that my process is my process. It works for me. It's how I teach people to do literature reviews in ATLAS.ti. It's very similar in some ways to other people who do literature reviews in ATLAS.ti, and I'm sure that there are differences as well. So we'll just keep in mind that, like I said, this is my process. And then I do have time for questions scheduled at the end, but if you have questions that come up, as Ivana said, she's going to be monitoring the chat. You can also ask, interject. I don't want this to necessarily just be a me talking at you kind of thing. So if you have things that you want to jump in with or want me to show you or anything like that, please just let me know. And I hope that plan works for everyone. I just put things in the chat. So what is a literature review? As I said, there's a lot of different kinds of literature reviews. And so I've kind of put some things on the screen. There are critical reviews. There are just general literature reviews. There are mapping reviews. There are meta-analyses. There are mixed studies reviews, reviews, qualitative systematic reviews. There's just this big long list of what we say when we say literature review, all the different types of things it could be. And what this is the different purposes and the different ways that these studies are conducted. And so these would be, a lot of these are studies in and of themselves, but then we also know that the literature review is also the foundation of an empirical study or of a theoretical study. So it can be the beginning of another study, or it can be a study in and of itself. Grant and Booth, and I have references at the end, have done a lot of work, Booth in particular, on different types of reviews. For anyone completing literature reviews, particularly in the health sciences, for systematic reviews, there's the preferred reporting items for systematic reviews and meta-analyses called the PRISMA statement. And what this is it's basically guidelines for conducting and reporting how you did your review. And so there will, particularly with systematic reviews in the hard sciences, you'll see a lot of researchers refer to the PRISMA guidelines. And so keeping in mind, that's another aspect of literature reviews to help guide researchers in actually making sure that they're systematic in gathering their resources and reporting that and how they gathered their resources to their readers. But what I'm talking about today is going to be more like what Smith and Shearman talk about when they talk about a scoping review. And they've written a lot about this. And I think several years ago, Bridget Smith did a webinar with the Cactus Project on scoping reviews and ATLAS.ti. So she's done some more work on this as well. And this is, to me, what people kind of think of when they think of the general lit review is this scoping review. It's that exploratory review. Like you have an exploratory research question and you're really trying to find out what's in the literature and what gaps are there. And so this is kind of what people may think of when they think of a more traditional or this more general literature review. It's to find out what's there, it's to find out what we need to know, and it's to synthesize existing knowledge. So it's not that listing, it's not this article says this one says this one says this one says this. It's I read all these articles and here are the key concepts that we know about this topic across this range of resources. And because I can tell you what we know, I can now tell you what we don't know and where additional research would be helpful. And so if you're doing an empirical study, that's when you would say, and my study will contribute to this gap by doing A, B, and C. Or if you're just doing a scoping review, that's the study of itself. That's when you would call for researchers to do, this type of research or this type of research or this type of research, would be, sorry, I'm gonna turn my heater off, would be helpful to actually help synthesize existing knowledge and contribute to what we already know. So when I talk about literature reviews today, I'm going to be really more likely talking about the scoping review than the more specialized or purposeful reviews that you see in this long list of reviews from Grant and Booth. So this question of how might ATLAS.ti help you? Why should you consider using a QDOS like ATLAS.ti or a Cactus to actually help you do your literature review? And so I really truly believe that if you're going to learn to use a Cactus software, your literature review is the best place to start. And I actually encourage all of my students to do it. Some researchers, Cactus is not for them, and that's fine. And some researchers find that Cactus really does help manage their project in a way that not having one they just wouldn't be able to do that. And so for me, I think the easiest way or the best opportunity is to try to do it through literature review. A Cactus like Atlas allows for excellent organization of your articles. It helps with preparing, exploring, and analyzing the literature. And so this is one way that Cactus like Atlas is very different from just a reference management software. It actually supports the analysis of the literature, and in a literature review, so much of what you're doing is basically qualitative data analysis that, in my opinion, a Cactus is really the most helpful software to use for a literature review. It also supports the detailed documentation of the process of your study. Everything is captured in your Atlas project, the steps that you've taken. You can note what you've done through a memoing process. When you make changes are dated, you can actually provide a step-by-step documentation of what you did to do your literature review, which can enhance the quality and rigor of your study. Doing a project in Atlas actually supports multiple read-throughs of your articles. And so I say that because for me, one of the most important steps of a literature review is actually reading the article before I put it in Atlas. So I like to read it and highlight anything that I think might be pertinent to my research question. And then I put it in Atlas to actually further facilitate the analysis. So in my opinion, doing a literature review in ATLAS.ti really supports multiple read-throughs, because if you're doing coding or memoing or things like that, you go back to the article and you read through it again, which furthers your understanding of the article. It facilitates collaboration with documentation. So if you're working with a group, working with ATLAS.ti to complete your literature review actually makes the collaboration a little bit better. You can work, one person has the project, they do some work on it, they write a memo tracking what they did. Atlas tracks what they did, who created what code or where is tracked in Atlas, and then you send it to your team members. So you have the documentation in the Atlas project that actually allows for the collaboration to be tracked. It offers you the opportunity to recall and analyze literature thematically or topically. And so what this means is when you are coding or doing your analysis, depending on how you're coding, say you are interested in looking at specific theories or topics that have been analyzed within the literature, you can do large chunks of coding and then actually run reports and pull those chunks out. Say, I'm interested in how a particular topic has been studied with the use of theory. So then when I'm going through the articles, I code every time they use a theory with the code theory. I can then run a report and just read those sections of the articles. So it'll allow me to actually recall and pull out sections of the articles without having to go back to the PDF, find it, copy it, move it, try to highlight it, cut it out. I don't even know. But you can then have it in one single document, which can also then be saved and added back to ATLAS, and that document can be coded. So it really does allow you to, if you want to chunk portions of the articles and reanalyze them or analyze them on your own, Atlas allows you to do that. And then it keeps almost everything electronic and in one place. So if you're using books or whatnot, they won't necessarily be electronic. But if you use a color coding system in Atlas, like I like to do, I then pulled that color coding system over to my hard copy books with colored Post-its. So if I was working with a specific color in Atlas, I knew to go to the specific color in the hard copy books. And then you can also, if you want to break from the screen, you can print out reports and things like that from Atlas and then go and read them in hard copy. So in my opinion, there are a lot of benefits to using Atlas, and people who have had experience using Cactus for literature reviews or other projects may have things to add to this list, as I'm going on. Now, I will have to say, Cactus is not for everyone. There are some cons to using Cactus for literature reviews and other projects. One is that there is a learning curve with the software. So if you are learning how to do literature reviews and you're also learning the software, this can feel overwhelming. But in my opinion, the learning curve is not too big. I felt like it was relatively easy to use. And then there's a very huge amount, there's a wealth of resources available online through the Atlas website, and then they have trainers. So while there is a learning curve, if you want to learn it, there's a lot of facilitation to allow you to learn it. Some may feel distanced from the literature, and you may feel distanced from your data, and that is just from working with it on a screen. And so some researchers feel like they don't have as much of a connection with their data when they work through a Cactus. I don't feel that way. I feel like it actually brings me further into it because I can manipulate it and work with it in ways that I can't do if it's not electronic. You may get lost in the technical aspects of the software. And so researchers may feel that they're too busy trying to figure out the right way to code in Atlas, or the right way to do a network in Atlas, or the right way to do whatever in Atlas, and that they get lost in those technical aspects instead of getting lost or getting immersed in the literature. That might be a hindrance to some people. There is the expense of purchasing the software, but one thing that I very much like about Atlas is when you buy it, you buy it. There's no add-ons, there's no modules, there's no different versions. I do like that when you purchase Atlas, you purchase all of Atlas, and I've also found that their student rate is very affordable. And then the keeps almost everything electronic. is also a con. Some people don't necessarily like the electronic aspect to having everything on the computer. You can get screen fatigue, but like I said, one way to mitigate that, if you feel like you have screen fatigue, you can print things out and you can take them out of Atlas and analyze them and then put them back in. So there are different ways to mitigate these hindrances, but I did want to recognize that this may not be for everyone, although I do highly recommend that if you're interested in learning a cactus, try it with your literature review first. So before I go on, I didn't know if anybody had any questions or anything that they wanted to note. Just wanted to pause here.
Thanks so much, Liz. So far, there aren't any questions about the literature review yet. I was just writing in the chat to everyone. I confirm everyone will receive the recording. I know people are putting their emails in the chat. There's no need to do that. You will definitely all get the recording. Everyone who's read, we already have your email, so you don't need to put it again. But definitely, if anyone has any questions or comments for the presentation, please go ahead and write that in the chat. For example, I really enjoy your introduction so far, Liz, with all the different kinds of literature reviews that do exist, and your approach to using ATLAS.ti for it and to get started with ATLAS.ti in the literature review. I think that's something that we also often do, and I have found that to be a really helpful way to kind of get that first touch with the software. So I think that that's really interesting. And I see we do have now a question. If you could please elaborate a bit more about the scoping literature review.
Sure.
Mhm.
Yeah, so this is, like I said, it's really what I think people think about when they think about the traditional literature review. It's that exploratory literature review. The purpose of a scoping review is to scope or explore the state of the field and try to figure out what is known about the topic. So it is more open. You're not necessarily looking for something specific. You're not necessarily trying to build connections between one idea or another. It is really just a literature review where you're trying to say, I have this topic that I would either like to do an empirical study about, or I would just like to figure out what we know about this topic. And so you are doing a broad scoping review of the literature to figure out what we know, organize that into kind of key concepts or key themes, and then say, based on, I've done this broad overview based on what we know, here's what we don't know, and here's how other researchers or myself could contribute to knowledge on that topic by identifying that quote gap in the literature. And I have, if we look at the references, here's something, and y'all will all get this, the reference from Smith and Sherman that talks about using ATLAS.ti specifically for scoping reviews. So they talk about scoping reviews, and then they also talk about using ATLAS.ti to actually complete those. So that article is very short, but it's very helpful. And then they have more references that may be helpful as well. And then the Grant and Booth article that talk about the different types of literature reviews. Dr. Ani Manira Mohammed, she has a lot of writings and videos about using Atlas for literature reviews, and so she talks about those as well. And so all of her resources are also very, very helpful. Oops. So, is it all right to jump into the software?
Yes, I think that sounds great, Liz. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll keep an eye out on the chat. Yeah, and you go ahead with the software.
Let me stop sharing. Okay, so my plan, and y'all can let me know what you think about this. My plan is to just kind of bring up a literature review in progress and talk about some ways to organize and analyze and run those reports. So, all right, here we go.
Yeah, sounds great.
Okay, so can everyone see my project? It says IFD metasynthesis.
Yes, we're seeing it.
So this is just starting. The idea is that it'll actually be a qualitative metasynthesis, a thematic thematic synthesis on interfaith dialogue. And so this project was started a long time ago and then stopped for a variety of reasons. So it basically has to be started over again. So this is why it's going to be an interesting project to work with, because I'm going to have to start over. And so this is what ATLAS looks like. I don't know how familiar many of y'all are with ATLAS, but this is 23. This is the new version. And so we have the Explore bar kind of window that has a list to documents, codes, memos, networks, document groups. There's multiple ways to get to everything in ATLAS. We have the tabs up here. I'm not going to really spend a lot of time walking you through ATLAS because you have a wide variety of resources available to you, and that's not really why we're here today. But every document in a literature review will be housed here, and you see that this project has 11 documents in here. Many of my documents you'll see have highlights, and this is because before I put something in ATLAS, I always read it in Adobe Acrobat first, and I highlight things in different colors that mean different things to me as a researcher. So if you're doing a scoping review, you may be highlighting a variety of things, abstract, methodology, theory, findings, discussion. You may be highlighting key ideas in all of those, because if you're doing a scoping review, the purpose is to understand the state of the field. And so you want to know what methodologies were used to study your topic. You want to know what theories are commonly used to study your topic. You want to know, if it's 85% qualitative studies, you want to know what they're doing. Are they primarily using interviews? Are they primarily using focus groups? Are they primarily using observations? And so knowing these different methods and these different methodologies, particularly for a scoping review, that gives you the state of the field, helps you say, this topic is studied 85%. Of these articles that I have in my literature review are qualitative. We need more quantitative data. We need more quantitative studies to tell us that side of the topic. I always teach my students that research is kind of like a coin, with qualitative research on one side and quantitative research on the other to get a full picture. It's good to have both, but different questions can be answered different ways. Different studies have different purposes. One is not necessarily better than the other, but knowing the different topics, the way that they have been studied, can be really helpful to you when you're getting a state of the field. Now, if you're doing a metasynthesis, how the research has been conducted may not be helpful to you. If you're, trying to answer a specific research question, you may be looking at the findings and the discussion specifically, and so you may be highlighting that. And so what you pay attention to in your first read through, in my opinion, depends on the type of a review you're doing and the research question you're trying to answer. So I see a question about reference management software. It does not, you build that in, Amara, you build in that functionality, and I'll show you kind of how I do it in the comments right here. And ATLAS does actually work with reference management software. I am not the person to answer that, because I do not really use reference management software, although every time I watch something about RefWorks or Zotero, not RefWorks, Zotero, I think, why am I not using this? So I do recommend that you check that out, and they do talk to each other. But I build that in ATLAS myself to help manage the references. And there are a couple of ways that you can do that. So when you put a document in, I think pretty much everything that you're going to read about or watch about doing literature reviews is how you name the article or the document in ATLAS. And it's very important, because that's what's going to pop up in your documents list, and you need to be able to recognize it. And so naming conventions are actually really important. And so you need to name it in a way that works best for you. I know some researchers will have the year first, so they have everything in chronological order. I like to put things by author. You may want to name it by title so that you're reminded of the title. And when you bring in a document to Atlas, it's going to have that document's name. So it's going to have whatever it was named in when your Windows or your documents folder or whatever. But you can easily right click and rename it however you want. And I left this one. So I like to name mine with the author and the year in parentheses, and then the title, and then you just click rename, and then the document's renamed. You can also see that my documents are not necessarily in order. We got 1 to 10 and then 37. That means that I had other documents that were deleted and some things that were added and that were deleted. And you can always renumber the documents if you want to. That's totally up to you, but it's just added in. And so everything's going to be housed here when you put it in Atlas. So the naming convention is actually really important because it's a way that you organize your data. You can also organize your documents by document groups. And that can be really helpful, particularly depending on the type of literature review you're doing. So if you go to the home page and you click the Document Explorer, it'll bring this up, and you can see the different document groups here. And so for my literature review, this particular study, I'm very interested in understanding a little bit more about what the literature says about how adults learn through interfaith dialogue, specifically what types of learning, how they learn, what is the nature of basically interfaith dialogical learning, as I'm calling it right now. And so the way that I have organized my documents into groups are how much do they talk about interfaith dialogue specifically. So there's a lot of research about interfaith encounters more generally, but it may not necessarily be about dialogue specifically. And so because I'm interested in learning more about how adults learn through interfaith dialogue, but I did not, some of my articles are specifically about dialogue. Some of them include information about dialogue and some may mention dialogue. My document groups are about how much does the article focus on interfaith dialogue rather than the encounter more broadly. So what did adults learn through conversing with one another versus, what did they learn through like a service project, or, if their houses of worship are right next to each other, or, we had an interfaith dinner or something like that. What did they learn through conversation? And so I have document groups that the article is specifically about interfaith dialogue. I have a document group that it includes interfaith dialogue, but it may not be about it. So, if these people got together and had an interfaith service group, service activity for the community, and there's a little bit in the article that talks about, what they learned when they were talking to each other, but then also what they learned when they were doing things with one another. Maybe I'll put it in here. And then there was a third document group that I have peripherally about interfaith dialogue. There may be like a paragraph here or there that talk about it, but it wasn't the point, and it wasn't really included. It was just kind of on the sidelines. So I didn't necessarily want to not include it. It still met my inclusion criteria for the literature review, but I want to note that it's very tangential. It's really on the edge. I'm not going to get a whole lot about this from this particular article. And yes, they can. Sorry, Ivana.
Yes, please go ahead, Liz. Yeah, we have a question in the chat. Can two document groups have the same document in them? Yeah.
Yes, they absolutely can. So you can have different types of document groups for different types of things. So if I wanted a document group, you can just drag and drop. I want one specifically for qualitative research. I'm just making this up. And I want one specifically for quantitative research. So now I have kind of my topical document groups, and I have my methodological document groups, then I can just drag and drop articles to these different groups. And you can see when I click on the article now, both about interfaith dialogue and qualitative research are bolded, because that tells me, and then you can also see that here in the groups, it tells me that that document is in the 2 different groups. So you can use these in multiple ways. And my recommendation to you is to be very strategic and how you use them. And you can also save new versions of the project and change things around. You can go back, things like that. But I recommend being very strategic and using the document groups to help you with that transparent organization. And this also helps to say, when I'm working for, if I've got everything coded and I want to do an output, I only want to do an output of, the articles that are in the qualitative research document group. You can do that, and it'll actually just pull the things specifically from that group. But what I mentioned before about building in kind of the reference manager aspect, this is where I do it in the comments. I have the citation here in the comments. I also like to copy and paste the abstract here. I know that some people who do literature reviews, they like to actually code the abstract in Atlas. And to do that, you would highlight something, right click, apply codes, abstract. I don't have that code in here. And then you could actually run a report, and I'll show you what that looks like. You could actually run a report that would just pull up a document with all of the abstracts in there. That's another way to do it. I like to keep it here because I also like to put my own assessment of the article in here, and that's kind of one of the first things I do. So I read the article in Adobe, I highlight what's necessary, I put it in Atlas, and I name it specifically, and then I go to this comment field and I put in the citation, I copy the abstract, and then I put my initial assessment of the article in to track my initial analysis, basically. And it actually brings out your first impressions and understandings of the article with relation to your study. And it tracks that for you. And so every time I go in and I look at an article, I have my own assessment there to kind of remind me of the things that popped up when I first read it and to further facilitate additional analysis. And so you can see that I have that with each article, except for this one that was newly added. Nothing's there. So I would read it and I would do those 3 things: citation, abstract, and assessment. And then I would get this handy dandy little yellow dot beside the PDF image to tell me that there is actually a comment attached to that document when there wasn't one before. Ivana, are there any questions that I need to answer?
So just we have one person who's asking to clarify about whether you would call this text to analytics or scientometric analysis or bibliometrics analysis. Maybe Brajesh, you can also specify a little bit more what exactly you mean by each, just to make sure we're understanding the same kind of approach, because I know sometimes the same thing might be called different, have different names. And then there's a question about the importing from reference managers, but as Dr. Pope mentioned, she doesn't use that herself, but definitely on the ATLAS.ti website, we can find more information, or if you'd like to send us an email, we can help you out with that, but I don't want to take focus away here. Yeah, for that. And so, oh, we have another question that's just come in from Betsy, asking if you can use ATLAS.ti to work with just journal articles, or is there a way to also analyze newspaper articles, PowerPoints, YouTube videos, brochures, and other kinds of things?
You can put all of those in here. Yeah, all of those documents can actually go in Atlas, and you can analyze audio and video data. with Atlas as well. And I don't have examples of that here, but Betsy, you're welcome to email me if you have further questions. And then Atlas has a lot of stuff on their website about that. But those are all document types that you can work with in Atlas. And Atlas will call them all documents, but they'll be in there in different ways. And if you do work with the software, you can download a sample project and you can see those different mediums actually in Atlas. So in the interest of time, I'm going to go further a little bit more. So my process is, like I said, I put it in, I write the comment field, I may organize it by document group depending on how you need to organize things, and then I actually work through and I code different aspects of the article. So here's a code for methodology. You'll see codes for, I called this the enabling environment. These are concept codes because this is what's important for my literature review. And so your codes depend on what's important for your literature review. So if you're doing a scoping review, you may have a big code for theory. Every time anyone talks about theory, you code it as theory. You may have scoping, you may have big codes for methodology. Anytime anyone talks about their methodology, you'll code that. Methods, you'll code that. You may have, and then you may build topical codes for the findings. Enabling environment, I have this one called informational learning. It's a specific type of learning that they talked about in their findings. Your codes are all found in the code manager. And this is what I was talking about with color coding. You can actually color code different code groups. I started this project before Atlas had hierarchical coding. It was pulled over from a previous version. That's how old this is. And so I have a prefix for learning about oneself, learning about others, and then LS is learning about self. But now this could actually be put in a hierarchy and I wouldn't need the prefix. But every time you code something, it's always good habit to add a definition so that your codes don't drift across the project. And then one of the reasons that I particularly very much like Atlas is because of the report functionality. And so this is one thing that I find particularly helpful for literature reviews. Say I'm interested in specifically doing an assessment of what methodologies have been used and how. I can run a report of that selected code to pull up a document that specifically looks at what I have coded as methodology. And there's not a whole lot because in this project, that's not the focus. But if it was important to your project, you would have this report come up and you could read through this report. You can save it as a document, Word document or PDF. And then you can actually put it back in Atlas if you want to do further coding and analysis of it. And so this is one of the most important aspects of the being able to do a literature review in Atlas to me. And this is another reason that naming your articles or your documents is particularly important because it tells you where they came from, where these quotes came from. It tells you, which document number, which quotation in the document, the page of the document, the title of the document. If you have any comments attached to these quotations, they'll come up here. So my comment is the definition. You can actually attach memos to these, and they will come up as well. And so these reports are one of the most important aspects to me as far as Atlas goes for being able to do literature reviews, because this is what allows you to chunk those aspects of the articles and reanalyze them or look more deeply at them. I've given examples of, I'm very interested in the types of methodologies that have been used or the types of methods that have been used, or the types of theories that have been used to analyze this topic. It can allow you, say you've got codes specifically for findings, you can pull those out and run a report. You can, if you're interested in the implications, how researchers said that what they found matter with connections to the field, you can pull those out and run reports. If you have codes or things specifically on future research, if that's one of the main goals of your literature review, is to figure out what researchers have said needs to be done, and you have a future research code, then you can run a report and do another analysis of the future research to develop the main concepts that researchers have talked about within that area. This would be one of the best ways to do it. There are other things in ATLAS that in time, I'm not going to go through, but there are things like code co-occurrence tables and queries that you can run that can also be particularly helpful so that you can understand where and how things overlap. That can be really helpful to see, this main concept comes in conjunction with this one often. And that tells you, the relationships between some of these ideas that you're seeing across the literature. The last thing, sorry.
Yeah, and so just to jump in, while you're showing this report, we have a question about the text that's being displayed in each of those entries. And is that a direct quotation from the article, or are these your own notes? And so maybe you could expand a little bit on, how you can distinguish between the two.
Yeah, so I'll run the report. I'll run another report for another code, and you can choose multiple codes if you would like. Just keep in mind that the more you choose, the longer the report will come to run up. So this is for the code methods that I created. This is the comment. It's the definition of the code that I wrote, and it's got the date and the time that I wrote it, which also shows you how old this project is and why it needs to be started over. And then these are the direct quotes from the articles or the data. And so in any ATLAS project, whether this would be a literature review or not, this is what would come up in a report. So this is the direct quote from the article. And so this is why this facilitates a very good second round of coding or second round of analysis, whether you want to use coding or memoing or whatever for your second round of analysis. Is because this is direct data. These are direct quotes from the articles that you've coded in the first round. And so in Agrawal and Barrett, it says it used a qualitative methodological approach, which tells me that it was a basic qualitative study, as Miriam and Tisdale describe it. Data was collected through semi-structured interviews with key informants. Interviews elicited insight into the experience of worshiping in close physical proximity with diverse faith groups, as well as the involvement and perception of interfaith dialogue activities. And so this tells me, this study does interviews. So however I would be tracking or organizing the different methods used, whether that be through, an Excel spreadsheet, which you can then put into ATLAS, or, if I wanted to save this as a PDF and put it back in ATLAS, I could then code this as interviews, and then I could, further break up my methods codes with the individual methods. I can also, instead of running a report, I can double click on the code and it'll actually bring me to these sections in the documents. And so if I double click, I now see where that is. And so, if I wanted to, I could right click and apply a new code. And I could name it however I wanted, I could just call it. And then I can add a comment here so that I know studies using interviews. And then that's saved. And then I have another code. So I was able to do a second round of coding based on either the code report or just double clicking on that section of the output for the codes. And so, and then draw on interviews. So I could then, go to this article, apply codes, find that code and add it. And now interviews have been added here. So if I were to run another report, it would actually pull up that as well. So if I go back to the code manager, I can click these two codes and run a report. And now we'll see where, you know, we've got some overlap for these two quotations. 2.5 shows up here and here. And so you can see them in the reports as well. But if I ran a code co-occurrence manager between these, code co-occurrence between these two codes, I would see where they would overlap in kind of a chart form or a table form as well.
That's great. And we have another question that's maybe a little bit related here. How could you use ATLAS.ti to determine similarities and differences between different articles in the literature review?
So that would depend on how you organized your project. So that is one thing about Atlas, is a lot of it and what it can do is based on what you do as the researcher. So this is why we say Cactus facilitate more efficient analysis. They're not going to do it for you. And so looking at similarities and differences can be done by running queries, in my opinion. And these would be under the analysis tool. You could run the code co-occurrence analysis. And so what that'll tell you is where codes overlap. And so that would help you see some similarities. You could see, okay, these codes often overlap. So I know that these two ideas occur in conjunction. And so they're related to each other in some way that I have to determine. The software is not going to tell me. But I know that these, you know, I can see in the analysis that these two codes never overlap, that they've never connected. So that's a key difference in the concepts in the literature. Yes, PW, we are looking at the version for PC, for Windows. Mac looks a little bit different. And so the last thing that I wanted to note in Atlas, well, I guess I could talk about two more, is the really quickly, the memos, the importance of tracking your thinking throughout the analysis process. You can write memos in Atlas and you can date them and, you know, do however you want, but you can also connect memos to codes and you can connect memos to documents so that when you run those reports, the memos come up as well. And we know from qualitative researchers that memoing is particularly important because it tracks the analysis process as you move forward. So you can think of, when I showed you the document manager and I had that assessment at the bottom, the assessment is kind of like a memo for each individual document. And then I use the memos in the memo manager as a way to track analysis as I move through the project, and they're usually topically based for me. And then the last thing is the network manager, and this allows you to map out the key concepts that you're seeing. So if you like to actually build connections pictorially, Atlas facilitates that. I don't know if pictorially is a word. And you can change the layout if you would like as well. And so I'm trying to find one that like you can actually see well. Sorry if I'm giving anybody a headache. Oh, that one's pretty. So these are connections that I have built between codes. So I created the code in formal learning. And then I said that relational learning and informal learning are associated. And I learned that from reading. I have a code called "This Learning is Hard." It's a definition. It has a definition, and it tells me that because interfaith learning is hard, it actually prevents relational learning. When you get stuck in that, this is just a very difficult thing to do. It can prevent relational learning. I have a code called "Building Trust." That building trust is a prerequisite of relational learning. And you would build these connections. There's a little square up at the top for each node, and you would just drag and drop to another node, and then you would link it in some way conceptually. These are semantic links. These are concepts that you're building to one another. You would link it in some way, and then you can also create a new relation type if none of the ones in Atlas match for you. And that's how you would do it. You would just give a new relation type, and you could actually provide a color, and you can decide which way the arrows go. So
That's
I
great.
will stop there.
Yeah, it's no, I mean, and I could also go on and on. There's so much to talk about and to show, but I think it's really great to get all these sorts of ideas. I hope everyone got some ideas for how you could use this for your literature reviews. And maybe one final question that we had that just came in, and I suppose sort of linking this now to the next step in research. But let's say from your literature review, you build a sort of theoretical framework like you're showing here. And so do you have any advice for how you could then connect this to sort of data collection and data analysis and sort of how that could all tie together?
Sure. Your data analysis and data collection, the kind of the focus of the content of your study should be related to your theoretical framework. And so, for instance, I do a lot of research related to adult learning and adult learning theory and transformative learning theory. And so my theoretical framework guides the research question that I write, it guides the interview guide that I write, it guides what I look for when I look for when I'm doing my observations, I'm looking for examples or evidence of transformative learning. When I'm talking to people in the interviews, I am asking questions about those components of the theory. And so your theoretical framework should actually guide how you create your procedural materials. So how do you create your guides? It should guide the types of questions that you ask, and it should guide your analysis. So if I say I'm working with a theoretical framework of transformative learning theory, and all of my findings are not related to transformative learning theory at all, then that means that transformative learning theory did not guide my analysis, and it should. So you think about your theoretical framework. We have this phrase, the rose-colored glasses. Different theoretical frameworks are different colored glasses. And so if I'm doing a study focused on transformative learning theory, somebody who's doing a study of a similar topic, but they're looking at motivation, our results and our questions and our interview guides and what we look for in the observations are going to be different depending on the theoretical framework that we're working under.
Yeah, that absolutely makes a lot of sense. Yeah, thanks a lot, Liz. And great, and thank you everyone for your interest. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope that everyone got some ideas for your own literature reviews and how to make the process more organized and get as much out of it as possible. Certainly an important part of any research project. And well, with that, we're reaching the end of our time here. And so I just want to thank everyone again, especially thanks to Liz here for the very insightful presentation. And Karin as well, if you have any final comments or words here, please go right ahead.
Thanks for the great talk. I think, man, I wish I'd known that back when I was starting my research, because you've presented it in such a clear manner. And congratulations to Atlas for creating a system that's so useful.
Thank you all for having me. And we'll share, Ivana said, we'll share the slides. I'll send them in a PDF format, and they have links to the references. And my contact information is on there if you're interested in reaching out. But I do emphasize that Atlas has a lot of wonderful resources in the Research Hub and online, and that's a great place to start.
Yes, thanks so much, Liz. Definitely, we will. On the one hand, all of you keep an eye out. You'll get an email probably during tomorrow, just for the time it takes for the recording to convert. And you'll get the link to view the recording. We'll include the link as well to the website for this International Qualitative Research Network. So then you can access Dr. Pope's slides as well as previous sessions that we've had, right? So you can see that all there. But definitely for any questions about how to do something in the software, please just visit our website, Google ATLAS.ti. We have a lot of free trainings, video tutorials, articles, and we have a live chat, telephone support. So you can always reach out to us for these kinds of questions. I would save any more, I don't know, methodological or sort of deeper questions of pondering about literature reviews and qualitative research. I think Dr. Pope's a great source, but for how to do something in the software, you can count on our team, I think, to not clutter her inbox too much. but definitely thanks to everyone. And I hope that you enjoyed it. It's always really a pleasure to get to participate like this and to help, everyone around the world who wants to learn more to connect to these great sources of knowledge and expertise. So with that, we'll go ahead and then close it out for today. So thanks again, Karen Olson and Elizabeth Polp and the whole International Qualitative Research Network, and to everyone who's given us their time here today. I hope everyone enjoyed, and I wish you all the best in your literature reviews and your qualitative research. So goodbye
Thank you all for
then.
coming.
Thanks. Bye.